Hi, good evening, friends. That shouldn't be a mess shot. Shh, you're not supposed to see behind the curtain. Good evening. Welcome to the Vampire Book Club, where we read books about vampires. Usually fiction books, at least so far it's been fiction books. This month we read this book, vampire fiction. We read these books and talk about them on my Discord server, which is linked in the description of this video. And then once a month, we come together in this live stream to discuss the books based on our discussion from the server, and also anything else you want to bring up in the chat. Let me know your thoughts on this book, and we will talk all about it. This is The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, a novel by Grady, Hendrix. Yes, it is pretty ironic. Well, it's not ironic. That's like the Alanis Morissette version of ironic. But it is a book. We are a book club reading a book about a book club, reading books not about vampires. They're reading books about serial killers. That's what this book club reads. And the plot of this book, according to the inside flap, is that a vampire infiltrates their book club, and vampires are a form of serial killer. So these people who read books about serial killers are now facing a real one in their midst, who's also a vampire. Maybe meta is more the right term. Yeah, I think you're right. So this is a horror novel. Do not be turned off by the cutesy title and the cutesy cover art that makes it look kind of chick-litty. It does have humor in it, as many good horror novels often do. It does have it kind of plays with the irony of lighthearted situations juxtaposed with horrific situations. But it is a horror novel. It's not just a novel with vampires like vampire romances are that are sometimes put in the horror section of bookstores because vampires equal horror. No, it's an actual horror novel. It is horrific. It is scary. It is dark. I suppose I should give you all a content warning because we're going to talk about the dark stuff. Content warning for sexual assault. Content warning for physical and emotional abuse, not at the hands of a vampire, so very much human abuse. And content warning for suicidal ideation and being hospitalized in psychiatric wards. So if those things are triggering for you, please be warned. So yeah, a lot of people were surprised that this is a horror novel. I was too. Even though I saw it was listed as horror, I was like, but it sounds so cutesy. I bet it's not really horror. No, I was wrong. It was nominated for the Goodreads Choice Awards for Best Horror Novel of the Year, because it did come out this year. It is relatively new. And it did not win the award, but it came in third place, so pretty high up. The book that did win the award is Mexican Gothic, which is not a vampire book, but is by Sylvia Cisneros, who wrote a vampire book called Certain Dark Things, which we might read for this club later. But I've heard Mexican Gothic is very good, and I own it, but I haven't read it yet. So you should definitely read that if you are into horror novels. But this one won third place, so very highly rated. There's been some controversy around it because it is written by a cishet white man about women and the struggles women go through. And some people think that's not authentic. Also, there's a lot of race issues because it takes place in the South, and there's a large Black population in the South in addition to the white population, and there are interracial issues, and the Black people are handled in a certain way that some people think a white man should not be writing about. I personally went in ready to be bothered by that, and I wasn't. That is my personal opinion, but we'll talk about that when we get to it. Yeah, I thought it was going to be kind of campy too, just based on the title and based on the cover art. And the original title for this, before they changed it, was How My Mom's Book Club Slayed Dracula, or something along those lines. And then they changed the title to this. Yeah, it did start out kind of cute and funny, cutesy almost, not chick-litty the way I kind of was assuming it would be, but still kind of cutesy. So the main character is Patricia, or Patty, and it starts out in, I think, the late 80s or very early 90s. Most of it takes place in the 90s. So Patty is, it starts out in 1988, and then it jumps ahead a few years, and most of it's in the mid-90s. And Patty is a housewife. She went to college to become a nurse, and she was working as a nurse for a while, so she's a trained professional. And then she got married and became a housewife and gave up her career, and has 2 children, a girl and a boy. Girl is Corey, boy is Blue. Her husband is Carter. This is not a sequel to Grady Hendrix' previous book. I did look that up, but it is in the same universe, so it's the same rules of the supernatural, but none of the same characters and none of the same events happen. So this woman, Patty, is a member of a book club, which is a very pretentious, very snooty book club with very strict rules. And you have to give a presentation on the book. And it's her turn to give the presentation, and she hasn't read the book because being a housewife is hard. Being a mom is hard. Taking care of 2 small children, because at this stage her children are very small, is hard. And she just doesn't have time to read this boring, pretentious book that they're reading. So she goes to the book club and she tries to fake her way through the presentation. She fails, and the leader of the book club calls her out and embarrasses her, but then turns out none of the women at the book club read this boring, pretentious book. So 5 of these women decide to form their own book club. And these are 5 very different women. One's kind of a religious nut. One is like a big fan of true crime and grisly details. One is a former New Yorker who's moved down to the South. One is a very uptight, very prissy kind of Stepford wife. And then there's Patty, who's kind of like your everyman mom, suburban wife figure. Yeah, I guess it does kind of speak to me, being a mom with a cute kid having a book club, except my book club is vampires. So the true crime mom says, I want to read an interesting book, so let's read true crime novels for our book club, and just the 5 of us will meet and we'll talk about these like lurid, pulpy grocery store books that you're supposed to be embarrassed to read, but we actually like. So they start meeting. The years pass. They're enjoying their book club. They're very happy. They've all kind of become expert on true crime and serial killers because they've all read so many biographies and accounts and things about serial killers. And then they've read fictional books that have been inspired by true serial killers. So they're very well versed in serial killers. And then a vampire moves to town. They live in this southern neighborhood in South Carolina that's very old-fashioned. Nobody locks their doors. The kids play outside. It is in the 90s, so they don't have the internet yet. Back in the 90s when the kids did play outside. So I guess I must be the same age as Grady Hendrix because he's writing his mom of the age when he was young, and like that's when I grew up too. So I'm the same age as what Patricia's kids would have been. So this was also my childhood, even though I didn't have a mom growing up because my mom moved out when I was pretty young. So I was raised by a single dad. But if I did have a mom who was a housewife, this is probably the kind of person she would have been. So a vampire moves to town. Nobody knows he's a vampire. Of course, they just think he's a guy who's moved in to help his elderly aunt who's kind of dying. And then one day, Patty comes home late at night and she's putting out the garbage, and the elderly aunt is gone feral and is all fours rooting through her garbage and like eating a dead raccoon in her trash cans. And then she like snarls and leaps on Patty and tries to eat her face. Patty fights, gets away. Someone comes and helps her, but she loses part of her ear. The old lady bites off a chunk of her ear. Old lady is taken, hospitalized, and then she dies the next day. So Patty is injured. She feels bad, but she also feels bad for the young man whose great aunt just died. So everyone's kind of brought Patty all these casseroles and things. So she's like, I'm going to take one of these casseroles over to this young man, even though his great aunt bit off a chunk of my ear and I have this bloody bandage on my face. I feel bad for him. So she goes over there to give this guy a casserole. And his door's unlocked, because it always is. And she's kind of curious about him. So she's like, I'm just going to use this excuse to sneak into his house and leave this casserole on his kitchen counter just so I can be kind of nosy. And she goes in there and she finds what she thinks is him dead. And because she was a nurse, she checks his pulse. She's trying to give him CPR and he wakes up. So she was doing her nurse thing and she thinks that she saved his life because he looked dead. But he starts getting very upset. He's like, what are you doing in my house? You have to get out of here. And he's trying to like push her out the door. And she's like, I brought you a casserole. I'm sorry. And he gets to the door, pushes her out into the very hot southern sunshine, and he's very like weak. He's kind of falling down, and then he kind of goes off. So the next night, he shows up on her doorstep, and he's looking young and healthy and fresh. He doesn't look dead anymore. He looks like a handsome, strapping young man. And he's like, I brought your casserole dish back. Haha, sorry it was so awkward the other day. I have a condition. I can't go out in the sun. It's, very debilitating, but I want to be neighbors. I want to be friends. So she invites him into her house, and they have ice cream together. He meets her family, meets her terrible husband. I mean, the thing about Patty's terrible husband is you hate this character more than anyone else in the book, more than the literal blood-sucking, child-murdering vampire, because her husband is the worst. I hated this character. But he does have moments where he's good to her, so it's complex. He's not just like a cookie-cutter villain of an awful husband. And it kind of goes in stages. He gets worse as he gets older, so he starts out kind of nice and kind of okay, but kind of dismissive of Patty. You can tell he thinks he's superior to his wife. He is a psychiatric doctor, so he thinks he knows everything about how people's brains work, and he thinks he has all the answers, but like everything about the serial killer stuff is going right over his head. Husband Carter, worst character ever. He will make you livid. There were parts where I had to put the book down, not because it was so scary that I was like reading between my fingers, because there were parts like that. It's very scary, but because I was just so mad at how awful this character was, I had to put the book down. So the vampire's name is James, and anyone who's reading this book obviously knows he's a vampire, because we're genre savvy. We know when you find a guy that seems dead and can't go out in the daylight, obviously he's a vampire. But of course, Patty doesn't know. So she invites him into her house, and they have ice cream and whatever. And they start kind of a friendly, neighborly relationship. And she goes over to his house during the day again to see him. And at one point when she went to his house on the day, she saw his cleaning lady come up. And his cleaning lady's a Black woman named Francine. And then when she comes back to his house later, it's messy. And she's like, oh, didn't Francine clean up around here? He's like, no, she quit. She left. I fired her. So she offers to help him out. And he says, well, my problem is I can't go out in the day. My great aunt died. I have to take care of all of her estate business. I have these letters from the bank. I have to transfer the deeds to the house to my name, but I can't go anywhere during the day. I don't know what to do. Also, look at this giant duffel bag full of money I found in her crawl space. Totally. It was just here in the house. Oh, I need to deposit it in a bank, but won't that look suspicious because I lost my driver's license and I don't know what to do. So Patty's like, this is making me really uncomfortable, but I'm a neighborly Southerner. I have to offer to help. And I like that she wasn't just completely duped into it. She wasn't just being stupid. Like, she did make a stupid choice by offering to help, but you get why she made it. She wasn't just completely gullible. She did, like, her alarm bells were going off. And she offers to help him. She takes him to the bank. She co-signs on his bank account so he can open it. She gets him so his life is set up. And even as she's doing it, she's like, this is wrong. I'm probably being a fool. He's probably a scam artist. But it's also kind of exciting because my life is really boring. So, yeah. And then she goes on her merry way. He becomes neighborly. He starts coming over often. He hangs out with her family. And then one night her husband goes out because her husband, of course, spends too much time at the office. And she's like, he's surely not having an affair. He really wants this promotion at work. So by now her kids have grown up a bit. So they're like middle school age. So James comes over to her house and then leaves. And then, she's hanging out with her kids while her husband's gone. They hear a man on the roof of the house. What happened first is she invited James to come to her book club, right? And James came to her book club, and she didn't tell her book club he was coming, and they got kind of upset, and it was really awkward, so James leaves. But what happens before he leaves is Carter's mother, who's dying, and she has severe dementia, and she says things that don't make sense. She has conversations with people who don't exist. Every time she sees James when he comes over to dinner, she calls him white pickings and accuses him of murdering her father and says he ruined her life 60 years ago back on the ranch, and he hasn't aged a day, and she keeps accusing him of this. And of course, no one believes her because they think it's her dementia or her Alzheimer's or whatever it is she has that's making her say these things. And she keeps saying, I found a picture of you, and I found this picture, and I'm going to show it and prove to everyone that you're Hoyt Pickens and you haven't aged a day, and you're going to ruin our lives the same way you ruined my daddy's life. So at the book club, she comes out of the bath stark naked and says all this in front of the book club. Very awkward. Everyone leaves. So Patty's home alone with the kids, and they hear a man on the roof. And she and her kids are very scared. They're kind of like panic rooming it. They're huddled together. They hear someone walking around up there. They turn on the backyard floodlights. They see a hand like disappear over the edge of the roof. It's very scary. And then their phone isn't working. There's a windstorm, so their phone isn't working. They can't call for help. They can't do anything. And then she's like, okay, kids, you stay locked inside. I'm going to make a run for the neighbor's house, see if I can call the police. And she had tried to call the police already, but she didn't think she got through. So she opens the door, and she's about to make a run for the neighbor's house when James Harris comes in the door, and he's like, I saw your lights on. What's going on? Why are you guys all in here why are you all so scared? She's like, you saved the day. You've come and you saved us. And he's like, let me go check on Grandma. I just want to go in there and see Grandma alone and make sure she's okay. And Patty's like, no. You could tell James really wants to go in there, probably to kill her, because she found his photo, and he wants, like, you as the reader know this. And Patty doesn't let it happen. So she thanks James for coming and saving them. She doesn't think James was the one on the roof. We do, because we're genre-savvy readers, but she doesn't. And James, she gets rid of him. The police show up, and James is like, you shouldn't call the police. Don't call the police. Don't call them. And she's like, why not? So she calls them. Police show up. Then her husband gets home and gets mad at her for making a fuss over nothing. Gets mad at her for embarrassing him by calling the police. Thanks, James, for being such a good man, coming over and helping the poor woman. And, James leaves, and then he doesn't get his chance to go in and do whatever he wanted to do with Grandma, so it's okay. Then they have this nurse who comes and takes care of Grandma. And one of the nice things about this book club she's in is when Grandma got stuck with them, because Carter and his two brothers were supposed to share Grandma and let her pass around between them, but they both flaked out. So they got stuck with Grandma full time. It's very hard. So the book club rallied and got Patricia help, got her supplies, got everything she needed to take care of Grandma. And you see these women kind of coming together. One woman's just like, I am in distress. I'm having trouble. And they show up at her door with bushels of it. Here's a live-in nanny. Here's a hospital bed, all the things you need. It's just so good how these women take care of each other. So this woman, whose name is Mrs. Green, she is a Black woman. She is working there. She's the nurse that's taking care of Grandma. She also cooks and cleans sometimes. She kind of works part-time cleaning other ladies' houses. And Grandma is there with her. The family's gone out for the night. Grandma and Mrs. Green are in the house alone. And Grandma is telling Mrs. Green, I found that picture I was looking for. Let me show you this picture of Hoyt Pickens. And then all of a sudden, before Grandma can do that, this mob of giant swamp rats, or marsh rats they call them, just come into the house, overtake everything, start trying to eat them alive. And Mrs. Green has a childhood trauma from marsh rats, because apparently they're a problem in this part of the world. And so she's trying to help the old lady and get her up away from the rats, but these rats are flooding into the room. The floor is so thick with rats, rats this big, rats the size of poodles. And they're balding and diseased and slimy and really disgusting. And one crawls up Mrs. Green's shirt and is trying to eat her stomach out. So she freaks out. She runs into the bathroom and she has a panic attack. By the time she comes out, Grandma has been too devoured by rats to survive. She gets hospitalized and she dies the next day. So she never gets to tell the story she never gets to show the picture. But before this happened, she did tell Patricia the story about this man, Hoyt Pickens, who came to her town and ruined the whole town. He got them into some shady business deals. Children started dying in town. And her dad and the other white men in town believed it when Hoyt Pickens told them it was a Black man who was killing the children. So they lynched this Black man and buried him in the ground. It's a very horrible, tragic backstory. And she tells all this to Patty, but she doesn't tell Patty she thinks the vampire James is this man until later on when we find the picture. But because she got killed by rats, the picture disappears. And they kind of have to totally clean out that whole room because it's just covered in rat poop and pee. And their poor dog, they have this poor dog who was like trying to attack the rats, and the dog was being such a good dog, and the rats just like devoured this dog. But the dog doesn't die. The dog lived. They took the dog to the vet and paid the very expensive medical bills to get the dog to live. So Mrs. Green has also been injured from this rat attack, but now she's also out of a job because Grandma's dead. So Patricia feels bad. She thinks Mrs. Green is his hero. She tried to save Grandma, but she failed. We owe her so much. She was through this horrible thing in our house. Because, after the man on the roof incident, Patricia got really scared. She started keeping all her doors and windows locked all the time, right? Which was hard because their air conditioner was broken. And, the implication is that the vampire ruined their air conditioner to try to get them to open their windows. But because James started coming over and interacting with the family so much, they started feeling more comfortable. So she started leaving the windows open, and that's how the rats got in. So he kind of eased them into being comfortable enough. Because the vampire sent the rats in, right? That's what Dracula does. So of course it was the vampire. And they do figure that out later, that vampires can't control rats. So, no, Grandma was not a boomer. Patty and Carter would be boomers, technically, in this situation. And Grandma would have been greatest generation. Yes, the dog's name is Ragtag. He's a very good little dog. And so Patty feels bad for Mrs. Green. So she wants to go over to Mrs. Green's house and bring her a pie and bring her some money. But she doesn't want to drive out to the black neighborhood all by herself. She's not comfortable. So she asks her book club to see if one of them will go with her to the black neighborhood. And they all say no because none of them feel comfortable. And she finally guilts one of them into going with her. So they drive out to the black neighborhood, and it's this very poor area of town out in the sticks in the country. The houses are much smaller, less upkeep, very southern. And they get there and they park, and all these young men who are playing basketball come over and start trying to intimidate them. And they're like, we don't want white people here, very intimidating. And the women are very scared and they want to leave. But then Mrs. Green comes out and sends all the boys away and just like, get out of here, leave my friends alone. And they ask, why are they acting this way to us? And she tells them, well, there's been a white man in the woods luring our little black children out there and doing horrible things to them. So, of course, they're suspicious of strangers in this part of town, and that's what's going on. And the women are just like, what? So Mrs. Green tells them all about this, and they find out that, yes, there's supposedly a strange white man who comes in a white van and lures the children out into the woods and is maybe giving them drugs, doing something. 2 little children have started acting really strange. One sort of zombie walked himself out into traffic and committed suicide, but what 8-year-old commits suicide? His older cousin went into the woods to try to figure out what was going on out there. He turns up dead. Francine, the lady who used to clean James's house and disappeared, she actually disappeared. She's gone. They say, she ran off with some man, but Mrs. Green knows that if she did run off with some man, she wouldn't have left her cat behind. So very suspicious. She says, I saw a strange van driving around late at night. I wrote down the license plate number. So Patty offers to help Mrs. Green. She feels really bad because the check she brought for Mrs. Green is very small. She thought it was big, but as soon as she sees how Mrs. Green reacts to it, she realizes that, this is too small. And she's like, okay, I'm going to get you a new job. I'm going to find work for you. It's going to be okay. So she knows that James Harris has a white van, or at least he used to. It recently disappeared. So she knows that her nosy neighbor, who's in her book club, writes down license plate numbers of vans too. So she goes back home and she asks to look at her book of license plate numbers. And would you believe it? It's the same license plate number as James Harris's van. So Patty is now very suspicious. So she starts making a list of evidence. She's thinking of all the serial killer books she's read. She's like, Jeffrey Dahmer lived right under their noses and they all felt stupid for not seeing it sooner. We're not going to be like those women. We're going to be smart. She puts together this list of evidence. She brings it to her book club, and they all think she's lost it. They're like, you're just a bored housewife who needs entertainment, and you're making up conspiracy theories, and no one in her book club believes her, except for the one that went with her to Mrs. Green's house. She's like kind of on the fence, but the rest are the rest are not feeling it. Until the one who's kind of a Bible thumper in their group is like, oh, this is what God has called us to do. Protect the little children. We are going to help. So they all kind of eventually get on board with this. And one of them is married to a lawyer. So they're like, we're going to bring this evidence before this lawyer, and we're going to... Patty doesn't tell them she thinks he's a vampire. She tells them she thinks he's dealing drugs to the children. And something else that happened was when she was out there, Miss Green told her about this other little girl that's having the same symptoms. So Patty suddenly gets this bad feeling. She goes back out to the country town, and she goes to the house of the mom of that little girl, asks to see her. She's like, I'm a nurse. Let me look at her. And the mom really doesn't want to, but they talk her into it, and they go into the room, and the little girl's gone. And the woods is behind the house. So she goes on the woods. Patty's looking for a little girl. She goes all the way through the woods to a row behind the woods, and she sees James Harris's van there. She opens up the back of the van, shines her flashlight in, and sees James Harris bent over this little girl, sucking her blood. And he's got this like black, like cockroach leg thing that comes out of his mouth, and that's what sucks the blood. It's very disgusting. Yeah. So then she's trying to tell everyone. Oh, she calls the cops, and her husband comes out, and he's like, what are you doing? Why did you call the cops? You embarrassed us all. And she says, I saw something happening to that little girl. I saw a man attacking her. She doesn't tell him about the vampire thing, so she says he was just abusing her, and he gave her drugs, and that's why she's acting all hypnotized. And so her husband promises that he would tell the cops, and her husband's being very supportive of her. But then the next day, she says, okay, we promised to help this family. We promised to help this little girl. We have to go tell the doctors what we think. And they're like, oh, no, the doctors took the girl away from their mother because they thought the mother's boyfriend was the one abusing her. And she's like, but the mother doesn't even have a boyfriend. And her husband says, well, I can't make the calls and put my neck on the line for this poor black lady. You know, I got a promotion on the line. I can't do that. She's not one of us. And he's very racist, and it's horrible. So Patricia's still saying, well, I saw James doing something to her. It's James's fault. And then like the next night, James comes over to her house for dessert again. And she's like, we just saw each other last night. I saw you drinking that little girl's blood. I don't want you to come in, but this is very awkward. And so he kind of pressures his way into her house. And he's sitting down at the table, and she's giving her husband this look like, shut up, shut up, shut up. And her husband's like, I think Patty has something to say to you, James. Patty's very sorry for accusing you of being a child molester. She's sorry she went to the cops, and she just finished lying her ass off to James, saying she wasn't the one who went to the cops, and her husband just throws her completely under the bus. Oh, I hated this part so much. He's just so awful to her. And she can't do anything. She just has to like smile and grin through it because this is her life. So she goes to her book club. She brings all this evidence to her book club. She finally convinces them to do something. She tells them he's selling drugs. This is her lie because she knows they're not going to believe he's a vampire. Selling drugs to poor little black children, being a predator. And they agree to go along with it. The one who's married to a lawyer talks to him. He agrees to bring 2 district attorneys over or something. Or detectives. He's bringing over 2 professionals that he's going to come to their house, and they're going to give the detectives all their information. But then instead of that, all the husbands show up to the book club, and they're like, you crazy ladies, you don't know what you're talking about. You're just bored housewives. We're here to talk you out of this scheme. Those detectives were never coming. We lied to you. We're not actually going to help you with this. And we invited James Harris over here for you to officially apologize to him for causing all this ruckus. And James shows up, and they're like, okay, James, our wives are very sorry for accusing you of being a drug dealer and accusing you of being a child molester. So let's shake hands all around and just agree to be normal. By the way, we haven't told you this, but we 5 husbands are all in business with James now, and he's going to make us rich, and he's a good friend of ours. We have drinks with him in the pub all the time. So yeah, we're going to believe him over you. So shake hands and be friends. And they all agree to do it except for Patty. She's like, I refuse. I'm not going to. So they leave. And then Patty's husband's mad at her. And then Patty calls her friends afterwards, like, why did you do that? Like, we agreed. how could you? And she finds out one of the husbands has abused his wife because of this. One of the husbands has lost some kind of business because of this. And so all the wives are now like, I can't stick my neck out for the Black neighborhood anymore because my own life is more important and my own children are more important and my marriage can't fall apart because of this. I can't help. And Patricia feels horrible because she promised Mrs. Green that she would help her in her community. And Mrs. Green has 2 children of her own that she's sending away. And so she can't even have her own children in her house because she's afraid of them getting abused. And Patricia's husband comes to her, and because he's a psychiatric doctor, he comes with like a bottle of Prozac or whatever the 90s equivalent was. And he tells her, I want you to start taking this pill. Something's wrong with you. But, you know, we're going to fix you. We're going to get you over this hysteria, this like women craziness. So he gives her this bottle of Prozac and she's just livid. She's angry. She's so upset. She's so done. So she goes to like flush the pills down the toilet. And then she's like, you know what? He wants me to take the pills. I'm going to fucking take the pills. So she just like takes the whole bottle. She wasn't really trying to kill herself. She just kind of snaps and has a moment. She wakes up in the hospital, like strapped down to the bed in the suicide watch ward. Sorry, I've been talking a lot. I'm very thirsty. And her husband is there and he says, how could you do this to us? You made me lose my promotion because now they know I have an unstable wife and they're not going to promote me. And you have traumatized our children because our children found you. And he brings the children into the room and makes them look at her and they both like have complete temper tantrums and it's awful. And he just like traumatizes them further just to make her the bad guy. Oh, very upsetting. Excuse me a moment. I need to get some water. So refreshing. Yeah, this guy is the worst. Like, the vampire is awful. This is not a sexy vampire. This is not a sympathetic vampire or a redeemable vampire. But the husband, I hated him a lot more. So the after her suicide attempt, she's just completely broken. She's completely embarrassed. Her husband gives her this ultimatum, like, suck it up and be normal or else profit. And then she does. She gives in. Then 3 years pass. And they've been 3 good years. She's kind of repressed everything. She's just out of it. All the husbands have gotten rich from working with James. James is everyone's best friend. She's kind of gaslit herself into believing that she made it all up and she was just crazy. Sorry to use that word, but that's what she uses. And he's taken over the book club, and now it's not a 5-woman true crime book club anymore. Now it's a whole community-wide book club where they read awful books like Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus, and nobody likes the books they read. So, like, even her book club is gone. So, yeah. So 3 years later, new beginning. She's kind of starting from zero, but things start happening again. So Mrs. Green now cleans houses for James. And okay, what really kicks it off is when Patty sees the ghost of Grandma. So the ghost of Grandma comes to Patty because James has gotten very close with her son Blue, who is now this very angsty, moody teenager who he's always been kind of obsessed with Nazis, but now he's like a teenager obsessed with Nazis, and it's bad news. So, and now he's friends with a vampire. So he's like now best friends with James Harris. And the ghost of Grandma comes And the ghost of Grandma tells Patty to go see Miss Green because Miss Green has a picture. This picture that disappeared the night the rats came. So Patty is like, I put all this behind me. I don't want to get back into it again. But she goes over to Mrs. Green's house. And Mrs. Green is like, you left me. You let me down. You promised me that you white ladies were going to come and use your privilege to help me. But you didn't. You only care about yourselves. You don't care about me or my people. And Patty's very apologetic and, but totally wrong. And she's about to get kicked out. And then finally she's like, the ghost of Grandma told me you had a picture, but I'm sorry, I'm wrong. I'll leave. You're right. I'm horrible. But just as she's leaving, Mrs. Green is like, I do have that picture. I saw that ghost too. And she brings out the picture and she shows it to Patty, and it's James Harris. And the picture is obviously from 1928. And it's like unquestionably him. It's not like could be a relative. It is him. So she starts the whole thing over again. She's like, James Harris is a vampire. You clean his house now as a professional cleaning lady. You got to get me into his house. Because Miss Green says, I think he's a serial killer. I don't believe in vampires. I think he's a serial killer. And I think he keeps a souvenir from every one of his victims. And I clean his house now. So when I'm cleaning his house, I'm going to look for his souvenirs. You should come over and help me because two people can look faster than one person. So Patty agrees to do this, even though she's very uncomfortable because her life is finally good and she thought she fixed everything. So she goes over to James Harris's house when Mrs. Green is cleaning it. She sneaks in. There's another cleaning lady there who she has to bribe to keep quiet. And she looks through his whole house, and he had completely demolished the old house he was living in and built a McMansion. And there's nothing in the whole house until she gets up into the attic. And the attic is disgusting. So the whole house looks like a show house, like no one lives there. But this attic is filled with like cockroaches and mouse poop and mothballs and dust. And like there's been raccoons living in there. It's just this disgusting attic. And it's been that way. Like this house is only 2 years old. So like, I don't know how this attic got so gross so fast. But up there in the attic is all the old stuff that belonged to his great aunt that he saved for some reason. Like all her old crap is up there. So she's looking through this stuff and she finds a suitcase. She opens it up and inside is Francine's body. Francine, the original cleaning lady who disappeared 3 years ago. So she finds this body. And before she went to the house, she had asked one of her book club friends, the only friend that she had actually kind of stayed friends with after the whole debacle, which is the Bible thumping one. Her name is Slick. So she'd asked Slick for help. And Slick said, leave me the photo and the documents that you have compiled. And I'm going to pray on this and see if I'm going to help you. And then I'll show up and help you look for this if that's what my prayers tell me to do. So she doesn't show up. So Patty's doing it herself. And then James Harris, who's supposed to be out of town, because all the men go out of town all the time. And they're all like on these business trips all the time, obviously with other women. James Harris comes home all of a sudden in the middle of the day when he's not even supposed to be going outside during the day. And he comes into the house and he tells the cleaning ladies to leave. And he's like, Patricia, I know you're here. And he starts hunting for her through the whole house. It's very scary. She hides underneath all the crap upstairs in the attic with like a roach crawling into her ear. She's hiding there. Oh, it's so gross. It's very disgusting, horrific description with the dead body and the mothballs and the mouse poop. It's very gross. And he looks for her and he almost finds her and she's terrified to death, but he doesn't find her. And then he goes back downstairs. She's stuck in his attic now and she doesn't know how to get out. So what Mrs. Green ends up doing is she sets fire to the real estate development that all the men have invested in. So he gets the call and he has to run out to the fire. But she doesn't know that. So Patricia doesn't know that. And then her other friend, the one who had driven out there with Mrs. Green, to see her the first time, she comes looking for her. She finds her up in the attic and she helps her get out. But then Patricia shows her the body in the attic. And so now this other friend knows the truth too. So now there's like 4 of them that know the truth. So they're trying to leave the house. And as they leave the attic, they realize they're tracking all this like dead roaches and mouse crap and dirt and dust all over the white carpet. And they're like, crap, he's going to know we were here. And now he's going to throw out the body before we can tell the police that the body's there. So they spend like the next hour frantically scrubbing and shampooing his carpets. And this is one thing they can do fast and well because they're housewives. And they just barely under the wire slide out the back door as he comes in the front. It's very tense, very exciting. So They're trying to come up with a plan of how to tell the police that there's a body in the attic, that the police will actually believe them and get a warrant to be able to go. So Francine stole the driver's license off the body. So she's like, I'm going to plant this license on him somehow. And I'm going to tell the police that he showed it to me, and then they'll have probable cause. Because, she reads a serial killer book. She's got good ideas. But then everything goes wrong, because of course it does. So that plan doesn't work. She wants to wait till after Halloween. And on the night of Halloween, she gets a call from the Bible friend. And she sounds very upset, and she can't figure out what's wrong. And this is like the day after she snuck out of the attic house. So she goes over to the Bible friend's house, and she has been raped. And she's lying there in like a puddle on the floor, and there's blood, and she's just like traumatized. She can't even talk. So Patricia's a nurse. She knows what to do. She cleans her up. She helps her. But like this black stuff is oozing out of her. It's not regular blood. It's like black sludge. And she's like, I know James Harris is not human because that black sludge is not human. And they don't know what happened to her. And the Bible friend is just like too traumatized to do anything. And she says that he broke in and he raped her because what she did was, instead of helping out Patty like she was going to prey on and see if she could do, she decided to call James and blackmail him and say, I have this picture and these photos, and if you don't leave town forever, I'm going to show them to the cops. And she thought that plan would work, but of course it didn't. James just came home and raped her and almost caught Patty in his house, and it was awful. So it wasn't that Slick betrayed her so much, it was just that she had a really bad idea. Slick was the name of the Bible friend, which I thought was kind of a funny name for a Bible thumping friend. So Slick comes down with an autoimmune disease, and her husband is afraid everyone's going to think it's AIDS because this is the 90s, and he's afraid that's going to make their reputation really bad. And the reason he thinks this is because he's been cheating on her with sex workers and underage people and like all sorts of bad things that all these husbands are doing. And she visits Slick in the hospital, and she brings the other friend and like, we found Francine's body. We have to do something. We have to figure this out. And Slick's just like very upset. She doesn't want to talk about it. She's like, don't worry. It's not like James is going to come here. And then James walks in the door and he's like, hi, ladies. I came to visit you. It's so sad that you're sick in the hospital. And he's just like gloating. So awful. So Patty says, hey, James, will you give me a ride home? Which is very brave of her, because as she's riding home with him, she's like, he's either going to turn left and take me into the woods and murder me because he knows, or he's going to take me home, and we'll see what happens. He winds up taking her home. And as he's taking her home, he's telling her that the husbands are cheating. He's telling her all these things. And he says to her, your husband doesn't deserve you. You should be with me instead. Your children love me. Your son is my best friend. We should be a family, and you should leave your husband. And she's like, what planet are you on? And she doesn't know this is like some kind of mind fuck, or if he's just that deluded that he thinks she would. And she uses this excuse to stick the driver's license she stole from the body in his car. So she's going to call the cops and tell him that it's in the car, and then the cops will find it and search his house. That's her plan. Of course, it doesn't work. Everything goes horribly. So when everything goes wrong, and James is like, oh, by the way, I found a license in my car. How did that get in there? So he tells her, I want you, I want your family. And then that very same night, she finds him drinking her teenage daughter's blood in bed, like both stripped naked, and he's like using his cockroach leg appendage on her thigh, and it's very sexual and horrifying because, this is a teenage girl. And then she's like, she hits him and she like stops him. But then he's like so big and strong, he overpowers her. And he's like, I thought you wanted to be like, I thought we would be family now. She's like, you're feeding on my daughter. And he's like, and so let's be a family. And she's just like, ah. And so he leaves and he's like, we're going to talk about this. And she's like, nah. She doesn't know what to do. She's very trapped. So she goes to her friends and she's like, now he's after my teenage daughter. She sends her teenage daughter to, she lies and tells her husband that the girl's on drugs, so they send her to rehab, so she's like safe somewhere. And then the husband's like, oh, she must get this from your side of the family. No one in my family was ever on drugs. This must be your side coming out. The husband is the worst. So she goes back to her book club, her old book club, even though she's not really friends with most of them anymore. And she gets the one who's sick in the hospital to call them all together, even the ones who don't even talk to her anymore. And she tells them all, she's like, we found Francine's body. This guy is a vampire. Yes, I lied to you and told you he was a drug dealer. He's not. He's a vampire. And they're like, okay, we're leaving. This is crazy. Bye. And she's like, no, you have to listen. And then Mrs. Green is there and she agrees. And, they're all talking. She tells him she's gone after his teenage daughter and we have to come together. The only way to kill this vampire is the way Grandma told us to kill a vampire, by like driving nails through his eyes and cutting off his head and stuff. And they're like, we can't do that. We can't just go murder this man. We don't know anything. She's like, we're doing it. You're either with me or you're not. And all except the very prim Stepford wife one, who was like the best friend she had sometimes, but also the worst friend she had other times. Like she was the one that rallied everyone together to help her when she needed it the most, but she's also the one that like dropped her the fastest. So all except that one agree. That one leaves. That's Grace. Grace was the one whose husband was beating her up because she embarrassed him. And he like broke all her stuff. So she has her own trauma. So they all decide that they're going to go slay this vampire. And they come up with this plan. And they say the only way we can do it is if Patty says, I have to use myself as bait. He wants to marry me and be my new husband. So I'll go tell him yes. And well, he's deluded by thinking I want him. You guys come in and kill him. That's our plan. So she goes to his house. She gets dressed up. She like does her hair. She does her makeup. She shows up and she's like, yes, I will marry you. I want this. And he just starts laughing at her. He's like, I don't believe you. You think I'm going to fall for this? What is this stupid trick? You dress yourself up like a clown. You look like a tart. You look awful. You're horrible. And he's just laughing at her, calling her cheap and disgusting. And you're just like, ugh. And he's like, of course you're so stupid. I came to this town specifically because everyone here was so stupid. I'm an almighty vampire. I've lived for 400 years and I'm the smartest, most brilliant, most genius man alive. And he's just like, terrible. But she tells him like, well, you said you wanted me, and she has this emotional breakdown where she just says all these awful things that she hates about her life and she hates about her husband that are coming from a very real place. So now she's not acting anymore. Now she's not pretending. Now she's just like, these are all the things that are awful about my life. And you said you could offer me something different. So yes, I am interested. And that finally works for him. Now he falls for it. Oh, thank you, Victoria Start, for the $5 Canadian. It takes a lot for me to hate someone over an evil vampire, but Carter actually made the cut. Seriously, Carter is dreadful and the toast is gone. These things are all true. So, Patty lets the vampire have her, and he's like, I'm still going to eat your teenage daughter, you know that, right? And she's like, if I can just buy her some time by offering my own self instead. And he's like, okay. I'm still going to kill her or eat her or do whatever I do. So he takes her upstairs. He makes her strip. He totally humiliates her and he starts sucking her blood. And then the other women come in with a baseball bat, a hammer, and a hunting knife. And the big Southern lady, who I don't know how big she is, but she is a big Southern lady. She takes that baseball bat and she like whacks him. And she just like whacks him until he pops off vampire drinking. And then the Mrs. Green tries to hit him with a hammer, but she kind of misses and he just pulls the hammer out of her hand. And then the other one who has the knife is too scared and she like wets herself and drops the knife. So they're like, oh crap, he's going to overpower all of us because now we're so scared because you don't really know how you're going to react in a scary moment like this until the time happens. And I thought this was very realistic that the author didn't just have these women come in here and just like baseball bat him to death and that was the end. Like it was hard for them. This was really hard. So what happens is the big lady like tackles him and she just like runs him off his feet and she sits on him and she's just like pinning him down. And then the other ones get the knife and she gets the knife and they finally like, she stabs him in the spinal cord and she like stabs through his spine and she gets him, but he's still alive and he's just like sitting there cackling on the floor like, I can feel myself healing already. Don't worry, I'll get you all. This is nothing. You can't do anything. I'm immortal. You can't stop me. Meanwhile, Patricia's like completely unconscious. So the other three ladies who are the former New Yorker, the Mrs. Green, the black woman, and the big Southern lady who was the true crime fan from the start. The three of them are like, we have to destroy this vampire. So what they do is they chop him up into pieces, and it is as brutal and as gory and as horrifying as that sounds. They like put tarps down, they put him in the bathtub, they saw him up into pieces, and he's still alive through all of this. They put each piece into a different plastic bag, and it's just gory. And the Southern lady is like, excuse me, she's like, I've dressed down deer before. This is no different than dressing down deer, but then she can't bring herself to do it. So the black woman comes up and she's just like, just let me do it. So like, she's the one who only has the like strength to get through with it. And she does all the carving up, and she's like, it's just a Christmas ham. It's just a Christmas ham. And she gets through it. And definitely the MVP. And they get all the pieces into bags, and then they're doing this at the time when the football game's going on. So everyone in the whole neighborhood is watching this game, but they know that the game's about to end. They know they're running out of time. And meanwhile, Patricia's like unconscious. They think she stopped breathing. They think she's dead. So they have to do CPR on her, and she's not waking up, and they have to figure that out. And they finally get him up into pieces. Even he's gloating the whole time, whining, telling them, you can't destroy me. I'm a mighty vampire. You can't destroy me. They finally cut off his head and drive the nails through his eyes, put his head in the bag. Meanwhile, all the bags are like wiggling and squirming around with all of his body parts. It's very scary. And then they're looking around the room, and they've like tracked blood everywhere on the white carpets, and everything is like bloody and gory and disgusting. And the game's about to end. And they're like, there's no way we can clean up this whole mess. We were just going to try to make him disappear, and then people would think he skipped town because he's doing all this like financial investing stuff. What are we going to do? And then the lady who walked out on them before shows up, and she's like, I can clean this mess. I am a super housewife. Cleaning is what I do. So she comes in, Grace to the rescue. She tells them what they were going to do is take the bags to a medical waste drop. But the bags are moving. They're like, we can't take moving bags to a medical waste drop. They'll never accept them. What do we do? She's like, I have a grave for my urn in the future that I have paid for that's just sitting there empty for when me and my husband are going to die. So you take the bags, you put all the body parts in one grave, like mausoleum things, all the head in the other tomb, and you lock them in there, and I'll figure out where I'm going to be buried later. Don't worry. So that's her plan. She sends the two of them off to do that. Then she and Mrs. Green stay, and they clean up this bloody, gory crime scene just in the nick of time as the football game ends. Then they get Patricia out of there, even though she's still unconscious. And they did it. They made him disappear. But then Patricia's all messed up from having her blood drink. And her daughter's still all messed up. And Slick is still dying from this autoimmune disease. And what James said as he was dying was that Slick's going to turn into a vampire, basically. And so Patty wakes up 2 days later with this fever. Grace has taken her home to her house. And her husband comes in, and he's like, oh, finally you're awake. You put me through all this trouble. I was just about to take you to the hospital, but good, you're awake. Now we don't have to have the embarrassment. We don't have to cause a problem. And she's like, I want a divorce. She just like leaves him. It's so satisfying. And then she later goes to the hospital and sees Slick, and she tells Slick that, yes, you are going to die. And Slick's like, I feel this thing growing in my throat, this cockroach leg thing. I'm turning into a vampire. Please cremate me when I die. So they do. Slick dies, and they cremate her. So she's fine. And then Patricia, who's had this horrible relationship with her children the whole time, she and her husband are telling them that she's getting a divorce. And the husband's like being completely awful about it. And they ask the kids, who do you want to live with? And both the kids immediately are like, with mom. So it's also very satisfying. So it ends with Patricia being free and independent, having the love of her children. Maybe she's going to go back to being a nurse like she always wanted to be, even though she gave it up for her husband. She's got her friends back, except for the one who died. Oh, her dog dies too of old age. It's very sad. So it sort of ends with her being like, we lost a lot, but we rid the world of this vampire who's been murdering children for 400 years. So we sacrifice a lot for this greater good. And Mrs. Green gives them this epic dressing down of the way they treat Black people and the way they treat people who aren't their own insular community. And they all learn valuable lessons, and it's great. And it's done very skillfully, I think. It's not heavy-handed. It's not preachy. It's not something that's like, this shouldn't have been written by a white man because he doesn't handle it well. No, I think it is done very well. I thought it was an excellent book. I gave it 5 stars. Very satisfying ending. It did have its funny moments, but it wasn't as funny as I thought it was going to be, but I think that was okay. The parts that upset me most were the human problems, the way the husbands behaved, how awful they were, but it was done so realistically. You could tell this author either did extensive research or had a background in this Southern way of life that is just so real. I live in the South now. I live in North Carolina, so not South Carolina like this book, but North Carolina, and it's not quite the same, but I can see where this is coming from. And I've only lived here 3 years. Imagine if you're just entrenched in this community. Ugh. I don't know if the rest of the wives wanted to divorce their husbands. The only one that I feel should have was Slick, but then she died anyway. Grace's husband was abusing her because he was an alcoholic, but he got sober, so I'm assuming that got better. And the other 2 husbands weren't as bad. Like in the one scene where we get to see him, they're kind of like, they do this bad thing, but they have these sort of sympathetic, redeeming qualities. And I thought they were very well-rounded characters, especially for people we only got to see once. I saw some criticisms of this book that it made it seem like the characters were two-dimensional or shallow. I didn't think that at all. I thought all the characters were very well-rounded, and I wanted more of them. You know, if a book leaves you wanting more in a good way, it's not just like, there wasn't enough, we need more. No, I wanted more in a good way. It wasn't perfect, of course, you know, it had areas of improvement, but compared to some of the other books we've read for this book club, and compared to a lot of other vampire books I've read in general, the vampire in this book was scary, but charming and charismatic. I saw someone compare him to Jerry from Fright Night. Very apt, very Jerry. That is an excellent comparison. He was kind of grosser than Jerry, but not all the time, because he was like an attractive young man most of the time, but very American classic serial killer. Yes, like Ted Bundy. What did the vampire represent? I guess Southern values in a bad way, like that kind of naivete that makes you feel like you have to be nice to people, otherwise your reputation would suffer, like reputation mattering more than values, something like that. Like, I don't want to say, even though there's so much misogyny in this book and so much of the way the women are treated and the way the patriarchy has like oppressed them is important, I don't think he was indicative of the patriarchy itself, but more of the society that raised it this way. Oh, thank you, Lindsay P, for the $4.99. You are awesome. I'm reading the chat now. That is why I'm being quiet. I have missed a lot in this chat, so if you wanted to really ask me something, it'd probably be best if you ask it again, because I don't know if I'll be able to scroll up and see everything. What am I drinking tonight? I'm actually drinking the same thing I was drinking last night, which is my apple spice infused vodka. It's a liqueur, so it's only 20% ABV, so I drink it over one giant ice cube, which is shaped like a skull, and I just drink it straight. It's very delicious. I have seen the criticism that the characters, people couldn't connect to the characters, and I think that's just subjective. I sort of had trouble keeping the characters apart until the very end. Like, I kept forgetting which one was Kitty and which one was Mary Ellen. They weren't distinct enough for me. I would have liked, like, I feel like it was a movie, it would be so much more obvious because they're very distinctly described, but then we aren't reminded enough of those qualities to sort of remember which one's which. Oh, thank you, Luciana Banu, for the 25 RON. I don't know what currency RON is, but thank you very much. What did I think about having a scary and disgusting vampire? Refreshing or just too Stephen King? Well, he wasn't always scary and disgusting. That's the thing. He was also sexy and charming, and people were attracted to him. So I thought he was a very well-balanced vampire, and I like that. He was completely irredeemable. He wasn't a sympathetic vampire in any way, but he was still a complex, well-rounded character. Like, you got where he was coming from and why he lived his life the way he did. And, you know, if you're a vampire, if you're this creature, how are you going to get by? You scam suckers into falling for your financial deals, and then you skip town and ruin their community so you have some money. You know, that's how he gets by. Like, I got it. Even, you know, he's obviously a villain, but a good vampire. Sucking the lives out of these communities, even as he was sucking the blood out of their tiny little children. And of course, he would go after the poor black children, because no one cares if a poor black child goes missing. But if a little white girl goes missing, she's on all the wanted posters. So, you know, he had the system figured out, and he was taking complete advantage of it. Yes, he's exactly like the monorail guy from The Simpsons. If that guy was a vampire, that's who this vampire would be. What did I think about how they handled the vampire anatomy / abilities? I thought it was cool. I like that all his body parts kept moving after he died. You don't see that a lot. That was pretty cool. I hadn't heard of nails through the eyes for a vampire either. I have heard of that for things, but not specifically vampires, so that was fun. I don't think he was funneling the money to charity. I really don't. He's not the Robin Hood of vampires, no. Oh, yes, the peaches. So, peaches are a universal symbol of the South. So I'm assuming the cover just had peaches on it with blood, like vampire bite on the peaches, because they would make you think Southern and cutesy. But there are actually peaches in the book, and we find out that Grandma had a peach tree in her backyard growing up that she would refuse to let anyone eat the peaches off of, even though the peaches were like delicious looking and glorious and ripe and juicy. She wouldn't let anyone eat those peaches. She said they were bad peaches. And once Patty, I think it was, went over there and she stole a peach and she ate it, and Grandma got very mad at her. And she's like, I thought it tasted fine. But you find out in her tragic backstory of when her father got tricked by Hoyt Pickens, the vampire, who later became James Harris, that when they lynched the black man that they accused of killing all the children, they buried him under the peach tree. So that's why she could never eat the peaches, because after the poor innocent man was buried under the peach tree, the peaches went bad. Yes, peaches are also a symbol for like sexy things too. So, you know, it's an erotic image, like vampires. And this was a very erotic vampire. When he drank from the children and everyone else, they had sexual pleasure, which makes it even creepier and gross. The cockroach thing that came out of his mouth reminded me of the worm that comes out of the anyang, which is the Filipino vampire lore, which Guillermo del Toro really likes. And you also see it in like Necroscope. It's this thing where like a giant worm comes out of the vampire's mouth, and that's what latches on. It's kind of like an alien when the tiny alien comes out of the alien, and that's drinking the blood. So it reminded me of that, except it was sort of like Tim Burton cockroach leg instead. So that was sort of a different visual take, better than a wormy thing. I like that better a bit. It was almost more like kind of robot-y, I think, with the angles to it. Yes, very The Strain with those vibes. Why is it that being bitten in a lot of vampire books feels good? Well, for practical reasons, because then you're not screaming and the vampire can get away with it. Because if it felt bad and you were screaming, they would have more trouble getting to you. But also because the vampire as a monster is supposed to be a seductive monster, not like a scary monster that will just make you scream and run. A vampire is a monster that lures you in and makes you do things you didn't want to do, which is a different kind of horror. So that's why it feels good, because then you feel bad about it and you feel guilty and ashamed, and that's horrifying in a different way. Do I think there's any similarities between Southern Book Club and my book? I can't think of any offhand. Did you think there were some similarities? I'd like to hear it if you did. Ugh, my drink is empty. I have to go get another drink. You wait. Well, yeah, James was charming to the husbands. He wasn't just charming to the people he was eating, though he was charming to those children that he was luring out to the woods. They obviously kept coming back and they were addicted to his bloodlust, but he charmed the whole society. And he did charm Patricia at points, so she did see through him because she was genre savvy. She read all those serial killer books. Her alarms were going off, so he didn't charm her as much. But she was the only one that saw it, so he was still charming everyone else. Honey traps, yeah. Do I think James used mind control on the husbands? No, I do not. I don't think he needed to use any mind control whatsoever. I think the husbands were ready to believe that this fancy man who came in and offered them this business opportunity so they could get rich quick was everything they wanted to believe. And anyone who told them that they were smarter and better and faster and stronger than their wives was just flattering them and telling them what they wanted to hear. And I don't think he needed any special powers to get that across. I think he just used regular old Southern charm, and that was enough. He corrupted the husbands except Carter. Is that because Carter was already corrupted? Well, Carter, she talks a lot about how Carter's not the same man he was when they got married, and that he changed, he got different. So I think James was part of that corrupting influence on Carter, though Carter was already on the road to that himself. Like, he was pretty awful to start with. But she has this memory of the man she married, the boy she married, who's not who this man became. So he wasn't always awful. Is this book horror or is it urban fantasy for adults? Because it sounds like it was written for adults in mind. Or maybe the genre is just more broken that it doesn't matter anymore. No, it's absolutely horror. I've written most urban fantasy for adults is for adults, but it's not horror. Most urban fantasy is a lot of murder mysteries, a lot of action adventure, has scary stuff in it, but is more about the fight scenes or the problem solving or like the magic building. This was horror. This was like set piece horror scenes, like in a horror movie where you get really scared. Like, definitely horror. I haven't read any Stephen King, so I don't want to compare it to that, but from what I've heard of Stephen King, it sounds like in that vibe of his horror novels. Obviously, he writes all kinds of novels. I wonder why Grady Hendrix, a man, wrote such terrible, awful men. I'd like to ask him. I mean, if just because he hasn't like followed in their path doesn't mean he can't see what the other boys are doing. Good for him. He's woke. He says in the introduction that when he was young, growing up in this era, he took his mom for granted. He didn't see how hard she worked, how hard her life was, how awful her husband was, how everything, like how much she sacrificed for him as a child, and wrote this book for women like his mom as just sort of like a empowerment thing. So I think he did a great job. And some men are great at writing women. Like, it's possible. It happens. What are my thoughts on the Hendrix portrayal of the sexual assault scene? Well, we didn't actually get the sexual assault scene. We got the sexual assault aftermath. And I'm glad that he didn't make us read the actual sexual assault scene, because a lot of authors will make us do that, especially male authors. It's like just gratuitous torture porn. So that wasn't in here. It was only the aftermath. It was a part about women coming together and caring for other women that we got to read. We got to read about how Patricia used her nurse skills to take care of her friend and to soothe her friend and to emotionally support her friend. So I did like that we did get to see that part of it, if sexual assault had to be part of this at all. And I think he included the sexual assault because he wanted to make James Harris like the ultimate monster. He didn't want it to be like, well, he's a vampire, but at least he never raped anybody. No, he does everything awful. And apparently raping is how he makes other vampires. Like eating people won't turn them into vampires, but having sex with them will. So that's how he does it. And James kept going on about how he was one of a kind. He's the only vampire in the world. He's so special, so special. So apparently he doesn't do it often, but he did it this time. Best Friend's Exorcism, which is another Grady Hendrix books, had a higher humor level, though there was plenty of horror there too. I thought the humor level in this was pretty high at the beginning, and then it kind of tapered off. But it didn't go away completely. There were still jokes, like even at the very end, even in the climax, there were still like funny bits. And I think it also depends on the tone in which you read it. I heard the audiobook is read by a Black woman, which is awesome, especially since the Black woman in this is only a supporting character. So it's just a voice of an every woman, which is wonderful. And I wonder how she reads it, how she reads those funny parts, like what kind of tone that sounds like. I read this version, so I haven't heard it, but I've heard it's a good read audiobook if you're interested in those. I mean, men can rape other men. If James creates male vampires, he could do it the same way. It's not like he impregnated her. He just like infected her. It was very STD allegory-ish. And you know, men give men STDs often. Why do I think he tried to turn Slick versus any of the other characters? I personally believe he wanted to drag the God-fearing woman to his level while mentally torturing Patricia. I agree. I think Slick was the most like Jesus lovey, so turning her into a vampire was like the ultimate fuck you. Definitely more so than any of the other women who were more like brassy fun ladies. And also, she was the one who blackmailed him, so he had some vengeance. We do not know how James became a vampire. We never hear that. We know he's been around for 400 years. Oh, great. The actress on the audiobook gave the woman very distinct voices. That's good to hear. I love it when they do that. Oh no, James's backstory is a book that would be like the President Snow Hunger Games book that everyone was so mad about. Because they're like, who cares about the bad guy? Give us more good guys. Any other questions or thoughts you want to share about this book specifically? There was a lot of deconstruction of character tropes, the religious fanatic, the Black woman, etc. Yes, there was. You had sort of character archetypes, but then they were turned around, like they weren't very one-to-one at all. And you know, it wasn't just like one token Black character. There were multiple Black women, and the like the Bible thumping lady. She was not like what you would expect. She was like weird in her own way. It did not rely on stereotypes at all. It took those ideas and then just went in a different direction. It was great. What's your opinion on the ghost scene? I thought it was shoehorned in hard, not a deal breaker, but definitely a weaker point for me. Yeah, I did think the ghost scene was kind of weird because ghosts had not been established at all as a thing. And when I read it, I was like, well, I guess if vampires are real, then ghosts are real too. But the only explanation we got was that the religious person said, well, if a ghost comes back, it means they're burning in hell. And if they're burning in hell in order to come back as a ghost because they care that much about you to warn you. So the only reason Grandma went to hell was because she chose to go to hell so she could become a ghost, so she could come back to warn Patty to protect her grandbabies. Otherwise, she would have probably gone to heaven, but she chose to go to hell and she made this sacrifice. And, that's just sort of acknowledging that hell is real in this universe, which wasn't established at all, or that God is real, which wasn't established at all, but ghosts are real. So I don't know if the ghost was supposed to be real or if Patricia was just having sort of like psychic experience, but vampires are real, I guess. It would have been nice for it to be sort of done as a rule of three sort of thing. Like if we had gotten some sort of ghostly reference or encounter early on in the book. And then Miss Mary comes in the middle of the book. That's the grandma's name was Miss Mary. And then she comes back at the end of the book for her final scene when she does her thank you goodbye. That would have been better. But when she just shows up out of nowhere, it's like you needed some planting for that payoff to work. I agree. I wouldn't say shoehorned, but I would say not set up. But you're right, Leslie Clausen. It does rely on many American/Southern ideas. Someone asked on Book Club Discord if this was a Southern Gothic book. I wouldn't call it that. It didn't have that Southern Gothic dripping moss off the gates crumbling mansion feel. It was very suburban white picket fence neighborhood. It felt much more like Edward Scissorhands, just because it takes place in the South and it is a horror novel doesn't necessarily make it Southern Gothic. It didn't have that ambiance, that feel, but it does rely on a lot of Southern ideas, which ghosts are very big in the South. And this is taking place near Charleston, which is the most haunted city in America, believe it or not, more haunted than New Orleans in New York, where ghosts are a very real thing and part of the culture. But if you didn't know that going in, if you aren't from that area, it would have seemed very out of the blue. Maybe he wrote it as someone who's very familiar with Charleston. It's like, yeah, of course we believe in ghosts down here, or at least we pretend we do. So therefore they can be real in this universe. And he took it for granted that other people would feel that way. All I know of Southern American stuff comes from True Blood, basically. Well, True Blood says that it gets it from Anne Rice. So it comes back to Vampire Chronicles. And someone even asked earlier in the Discord, like, why are there so many Southern vampire things? It's because of Anne Rice. You're welcome. As they say in the Sookie Stackhouse novels, which is what True Blood is based on, New Orleans basically became Mecca for vampires because Anne Rice set it up that way. And they're all like, sure. Why did Anne Rice set her vampire novels in New Orleans? Because she was from New Orleans, and she just wrote a book about where she was from, and it became very popular, and it changed the course of vampire literature for decades to come. You're welcome. Do I think the probe thing coming from the throat of the vampire is a trope is a nod to mosquitoes? No, I don't. I think it's based on those old Filipino legends that Guillermo del Toro uses a lot, and other people. Brian Lumley uses it. It's sort of like a old vampire lore thing. When you're looking up vampire lore, because you're going to write a vampire book, right? And you're like, how am I going to make my vampires different from Dracula or from every other vampire that's ever vampired? And you find these things, you're like, oh, that's cool. No one ever does that. I'm going to put that into my vampire lore. That's what it seems like to me whenever somebody incorporates that in. Yes. Don't you know these book club conversations always come back to Anne Rice? By the way, did you watch my giant Anne Rice video that I put out last month? Because I wrote the script for that video, and it was 11,600 words long, which is the longest script for a vampire review I've ever written in my life. It was just all of my feelings about Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles. So if you haven't watched that video, please go do. I worked very hard on it. It's so small, but can we talk about how James turns the ladies' book club into Tom Clancy Boys Book Club? Dick move, James. Yes! They were reading Tom Clancy. They were reading Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, all these awful books. James turned their awesome true crime serial killer book club into the most boring book club on the face of the planet. Oh, what a dick move, vampire. And he admits towards the end, he was like, yeah, I tried to publicly humiliate you enough to get you to kill yourself, and then I stole your book club to try to make your life awful, and yet you're still here bothering me? What's up with that? And she's like, I am a resilient Southern lady, damn it. Y'all, however Southern people talk. Thank you for recommending my video. I super appreciate it because the algorithm hates me. Did James mention about a guild or a club was going to go after the ladies when he was being dismembered? Yes, he did. So I felt like that was kind of set up for a sequel. So I keep moving my glass around and making noise. So as they're dismembering him, they're like, my friends are going to come get revenge. I'm part of like the Super Smile Club. It had a really silly name, something about smiling or grinning. And they're all going to come after you. They won't stand for me being chopped up. And they're like, you just said you were one of a kind. You got no friends. You got no family. You got no connections. You're not Southern like us. And he's like, nah, I got people. They'll come looking for me and they'll be mad and they'll do worse things to you and your children. Which was always his like threat in the end was like, think of your children. So I don't know if that's set up for a sequel. That's what it felt like. But from what the author said, as far as I know, there's no sequel planned. So may have just been one of those ideas that he tossed in that was part of his world building that didn't really go anywhere. Do I miss Manhattan? Yes, I do very much. Except if I was there right now, you couldn't go out in it anyway because this is the year of quarantine. I'd love to hear what you want to see in the True Blood reboot. So yes, True Blood is being rebooted, and this is my theory. They are going to take the True Blood universe and the vampire rules that were set up in True Blood, create entirely new characters, entirely new stories, just keep that same vibe, that same aesthetic, pop out fangs, and just create entirely new stories. And it's going to have none of the characters from the original True Blood, and it's going to follow absolutely nothing of Charlene Harris's Sookie Stackhouse books. Maybe a character will make a cameo appearance. Maybe one actor will be there, like maybe Eric and Pam will still be there. That would be great because they're the best. They're my favorite if they can get those actors back. But you know, some of the actors are dead. Some of the actors their characters got killed off on the show. Like obviously Sookie's not going to be there anymore. That's my theory. I think it will be a vampire show set in the South with that vibe that will maybe be good and maybe not. Who knows? It'll depend who's in it and what the story's about. Like I have no idea what the story's going to be about. True Blood originally was a murder mystery series where each season they were tracking a serial killer. And then it became something very different. If you read the Sookie Stackhouse books, the Southern Vampire Mystery Series, each book is a murder mystery, and they're cozy mysteries with a vampire romance backdrop. The show became not that very quickly, so I don't know what the show will be, whether it will be a mystery or just like soap opera. Could just be soap opera, which is fine. I'm curious. I wonder. It's going to be based off the show, not off the books at all. From what I've seen, and what they've said, very little information is known. I actually have a good friend who was an editor on the original True Blood, and if that friend gets a job on the new True Blood, I hope to get the inside scoop from that person. However, I will not be able to share the inside scoop with anyone, so it'll be for me to know and you not to know. Any other last thoughts or feelings about this book before we move on? I spent a very long time just telling you the plot of this book, which is kind of what these book club streams have turned into, is me summarizing the plot of the book. I hope you enjoy that. If you don't, tell me what you'd rather hear me talk about. That would be fine. always a delay in the chat. This did seem like it would make for a good movie. It was structured very much in a cinematic fashion, a very screenplay sort of beat structure, horror movie structure. It's probably too long to fit in a whole movie. It would have to be condensed, but all right, so next time for Vampire Book Club, we are reading this book, which has been sitting behind me the whole time, and you've probably already noticed. A classic. This is The Hunger by Whitley Strieber, which you may be familiar of the 80s movie based off this book. And that 80s movie starring David Bowie and Catherine Deneuve is very sexy. A very formative vampire movie for vampire movies to come. It was very formative in the construction of Vampire the Masquerade role-playing universe and all the vampires that inspired. It was very formative for goth culture of the 80s. That was out in, I want to say 85. Not The Hunger Games. Gosh. Google, if you were failing me. 83. It came out the year I was born. 83. Yes. So this book was written in 81. So the movie was made only a couple years after. And I put up 3 books for book club to vote on. It was between this, Solace, which is the first book in the Parasol Protectorate series, and The Angry Angel, which is the first book in Chelsea Quinn Yarborough's The Brides of Dracula Each Get Their Own Life Story series. But everyone voted for this one. So this is an older book. It might be a little harder to find. Your library might not have it. I bought this book used off of thriftbooks.com. It was only about $3, so used copies are available. There's also an ebook on Amazon if you just want to read like on Kindle. Hey, people have been mentioning it's hard to find an audiobook, but not impossible. So good luck. But what is this book about? If you haven't seen the movie, maybe you don't know. The Hunger is a haunting novel of desire. The desire to banquet on life without satiation. The desire to love without loss. The desire to be young and remain young and to defeat death through all the ages. Miriam Blaylock, rich and beautiful, lives life to the fullest. A house in Manhattan's exclusive Sutton Place. A husband she adores. Priceless antiques. Magnificent roses. But then, John Blaylock, like all of Miriam's past lovers, suddenly begins to age. Almost overnight, his body reveals the truth. He's nearly 200 years old. Fearing the terrible isolation of eternity, Miriam stalks a new lover. She is Sarah Roberts, a brilliant young sleep researcher who has discovered the blood factor that controls aging and thus may possess the secret of immortality. Miriam desperately wants Sarah for herself and for her knowledge, but to win her, Miriam must destroy Sarah's love for Dr. Tom Haver, who learns that his enemy is like no other woman who has ever lived, now or forever. In The Hunger, Whitley Strieber has created a novel of terrifying reality beyond and within reality itself. And in Miriam Blaylock, he gives us a loving and destructive creature of immortal stature. Yeah, the David Bowie vampire, John Blaylock, in this is only 200. But Miriam is supposedly like from biblical times, hence her name Miriam, which is a very Bible-y name. And this book has 2 sequels, and in one of the sequels, or maybe both of the sequels, there's a character named Lilith, who you assume is the biblical Lilith. So, yeah. In the movie, there's allusions to Miriam being from ancient Egypt times, so maybe even like ancienter than that. She is a white lady with like blondish hair, so I don't know if she is Egyptian and they just cast her, whitewash cast her, or if she's just from that time. So, a classic formative work of vampire fiction that shaped a lot of vampire fiction that came after it, I'm very interested in reading it and seeing all the things that are like, oh, that's where that movie got that from. It came from this. And if you haven't watched the movie The Hunger, I definitely recommend it. I did a review of it on my channel 4 years ago. It's been a while, so it's not of my oldest reviews, but is an older review. So keep that in consideration when you watch it. My style has changed since then. This book, people say, took a lot of inspiration from Anne Rice. Yes, thank you. One of the funny things is I was watching the World of Darkness documentary where they're talking about all their ideas of how they came up with World of Darkness. And the guy who wrote it all was saying how he refused to read Anne Rice, and he wouldn't read any Anne Rice because he didn't want to be influenced. He just wanted to look at Lost Boys and The Hunger and all of these other things. And then afterwards, he found out that all those things were influenced by Anne Rice. So even though he was looking at The Hunger for influencing his game, it was really Anne Rice through the grapevine all along. And I'm like, yes, it was. Because you know how I feel about the Vampire Chronicles. I mean, if you want to read the book before you watch the movie The Hunger, go for it. I don't know how different they are. I've heard they're very different, but I don't know if that's true. So you will see. It's not a very long book. It's definitely shorter than Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. Let's see. 318 pages. That's not long at all. Pretty big font, so not even that bad. Someone once said to me with a straight face, there's no homosexuality in Anne Rice. Well, that's just not untrue. I mean, true. So, the thing about Anne Rice's vampires is they don't have sex. They aren't interested in sex because once you become a vampire, drinking blood is so sexual and so sensual that sex and like human orgasms feel like absolutely nothing. They mean nothing. Vampire, the pleasure you get from drinking blood as a vampire is just infinitely beyond that. So sex means nothing. So if this person is saying there's no homosexuality in Anne Rice because they don't have sex and they're not interested in sex, technically correct. However, there are plenty of human characters that are homosexual while they're human before they become vampires, so incorrect either way. Like you could say these vampires are asexual because they don't like put their penises in each other, but they put their fangs in each other and it's even more erotic and even more sexual than sex is. So yeah, no. And it's all men together with each other. They're all bisexual. Anne Rice says the imagination is bisexual. And when you become a vampire, you become a creature of your imagination. Like you're not confined by your body and your hormones anymore. So whatever your physical urges were before don't matter. And if your imagination is bisexual, then you're equally attracted in a bloodlusty way to everyone as a vampire. Yeah, but as humans, there's plenty of gay humans and homosexual humans in Anne Rice's book, so your friend is wrong. There is literal homosexuality as well as plenty of metaphorical homosexuality, and it's great. We're talking about Anne Rice again, because that's what we do on this channel. If you want to ask me questions about Anne Rice, now's your chance. We've been going for about an hour and a half, which is where I usually like to keep these streams. But we always end up about 10 minutes longer, so go ahead. Or any other questions about The Hunger, or the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, or about this book club in general, or about my Discord server, or anything else about anything. These videos are free for you to watch. You don't have to pay to join my Patreon or anything or fund anything. However, my Patreon patrons are basically subsidizing it, so you should thank them and you should be grateful for them because I sure am. And I'm very happy that you are here to join me and read books with me because you see all these books on my shelf behind me? That is one of 4 bookcases in this room that has only vampire books. Not to mention all the other books I have that aren't vampire books. Like there's another bookcase over there, sideways, so you can't really see it. And then 2 more on that side of the room. And I have to read all these vampire books. So you're here to help me read them together with me. What do I think about the lack of God and Satan in vampire novels? I just brought up the ghost thing. I think there are a lot of vampire novels that have God and Satan in them, and then plenty of others that don't, and I think it's pretty balanced. If we didn't want to talk about Anne Rice, none of us would have come. Well, thank you. You are my people. I want to start Rice's books, but I don't want to read a depressing book. Well, they are all depressing in parts. But the thing about Anne Rice's books is they are, or at least like Interview with the Vampire, especially, is a processing of grief. So it doesn't leave you feeling depressed. Like, there's depressed people in it who are processing trauma and grief, but it leaves you feeling not hopeful, but like with understanding. Like, I don't think it leaves you feeling depressed. If depressing books are triggering for you, don't read them. You could watch the movie. You could watch the Interview with the Vampire movie and then move on to the next books if that's the one you want to skip, if you had to. Can I send you my wish list again if that's possible? I think that's possible. Let me see if I can pull that up right now. It is an Amazon wish list, and I know Amazon is an evil corporation. So if you don't want to support Amazon, I understand that. This wish list can be used as a guide. You can just look at it and then go purchase your vampire books elsewhere. If there's anything you think I should add to this wish list, which I'm putting in the chat right now, definitely let me know. And I will add things to my wish list. And if you want to see the list of the books I already have, not the ones I'm wishing for, that link is in the description of this video. Modern vampires are World of Darkness, Twilight, Rice, True Blood, and The Strain. Very agnostic. Yet there are so many other vampire things that are like crosses, holy water. These things matter because God is real and you are a demon from the devil. So these religious things actually have importance to you. And, you know, and I feel like all the other things that don't do that are the ones that are trying to be like counterculture. Crosses don't matter. Because so many others actually use God and Satan literally. Don't insult dragons? Who's insulting dragons? Oh. If you were to write a story with the Phantom of the Opera and Dracula, what would you have the plot be? Would you want them to fight or work together? Well, you know what? Someone else has already done that. It's called Vampires at the Opera, and I haven't read it yet. We should read that for this book club. I'm going to put that in next month's book because I really need to read it. I'd have to read that book and see what they did with Dracula and the Phantom together and then make sure my plot was different, personally. But I think what that plot does is Dracula's like helping Eric get Christine back, I think. And then maybe Eric's helping Dracula get Mina back. It's very romance-driven from what I understood, which I think is fine. Scrolling up in the chat because I know I missed some things. Do you think there'll ever be a nonfiction book pick for Vampire Book Club? Yes, I do think there is, because this bookshelf over here, let me see if I can show you with my camera. So that one over by my chair, ignore my child's toys on the floor. That has all my nonfiction books, which is plenty. I have so many vampire nonfiction books, which I want to read. I guess I'm worried people won't like them as much and won't want to read them as much with me. So I've been kind of wary of suggesting them, but there are plenty that I need to read. So yeah, if we want to do a nonfiction month, we should do that soon. Maybe after Vampires at the Opera. Do I review books on Goodreads? I used to, until I became an author on Goodreads myself. And then I became fearful that I would offend people, that I could only leave good reviews or nothing. And I wouldn't want my good reviews to be insincere. So if I don't have entirely good things to say, I don't. And then it just became a lot of pressure, and I became very tense and worried. So once you become an author who has a book out there that can be reviewed, it's a whole thing. So I stopped reviewing good books on Goodreads. Though I do obviously review them here. And one video of this book club is by an author that I now know in person. So I've made that video unlisted because I don't want that author to see it and hear my criticism and make things awkward the next time we're in the same space at the same time. You know. The New Moon soundtrack gets me in the feels. Twilight movies had good soundtracks. They really did. You want to be like, I don't want to admit it, but they did. Same with like the Queen of the Damned movie. Like, why was that soundtrack so good? How did it have any right? The music was all wrong for the characters, and yet vampire movies often have very good soundtracks because they know what we like. Yes, please don't speak of that movie. I assume you mean Queen of the Damned, which Anne Rice says, please do not ever mention this movie to me. It gives me great pain. I do not want to hear about it. And I made the dumb mistake of emailing Anne Rice being like, well, first I emailed Anne Rice and I asked her a question about Queen of the Damned, the book, because I was making a video about the movie and I wanted to like talk about the comparisons, right? And she answered my email. She was very generous with what she said. And she gave me exactly what I need to know. And I used it in my video. So I wrote her back and I was like, thank you for your answer to my question. Here's the video I made about it, talking about how bad the movie was compared to the books. Thank you. Never heard back, which I wasn't expecting to. But then like the next day on her Facebook page, she says to everyone, please don't ever mention the Queen of the Damned movie to me. It breaks my heart to be reminded that movie exists. It's so terrible. I hate it so much. And I was like, oops. I have never spoken to her again since. No, that's not true. I met her after that. But I didn't remind her that I was the same person who did that. So this Interview with the Vampire original soundtrack is also great. All right. We've been going for 1 hour and 43 minutes. If you have any other questions or thoughts or opinions to share with me, now's your chance. I'm going to let the chat go for another minute or so, see what you come up with. Otherwise, I'll see you on Discord. You can join me there. We talk about vampires all the time, all vampires, all kinds, or anything like tangentially related to my interests. Valid. If you think it'll interest me, it'll be there. There's about 500 people in my Discord, yet only about 30 of them ever actually talk. So it's not actually a very overwhelming Discord. It's a very chill Discord. We don't have drama. We don't have problems. We just talk about vampires and like goth life, and it's fun. And Phantom sometimes, yes. You have until the 13th of January to read this book. Plenty of time. It's not a very long book. I will stream again. Usually it's around the 13th, which is when we finish our book. It will never be before the 13th. Today we're streaming on the 14th because the 13th was on a Sunday, and I only stream on weekdays because people don't watch YouTube videos on the weekends for some reason. Like, engagement is always very low on the weekends and holidays. So if the 13th happens to be like Martin Luther King Day or something in January, I will go to the next obvious weekday. That's usually my plan. I can look at my calendar right now. I have that power. So the 13th is a Wednesday. So that's probably when we'll stream. Yeah. All right. Thank you all so much for joining me for the Vampire Book Club. Thank you for reading our meta book, The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires for the Vampire Book Club, which happens to be stationed in the South because that's where I live now. Next month, we're reading The Hunger by Whitley Strieber. You have until the 13th of January to read it. And until then, I will see you on the Discord. If you'd like to support me, you can join my Patreon. I would very much appreciate that. My Patreon makes all these videos happen. If it weren't for them, we wouldn't be here right now. Thank you. I love you. Read vampire books. And if you have vampire books you want me to read, let me know. And I will add them to my wish list and remind myself to read them later. So until next time, good night.